You want to know what the end of an empire sounds like. For me, it wasn't the millions chanting in the streets. It wasn't the gunfire, though we heard plenty of that. It was the silence of a half-finished cup of tea left on the Shah's desk, the steam still rising, and him gone. My name is Reza. For 22 years, I served within the walls of Niavaran Palace. I polished the silver they dined from. I poured the wine for his generals. I watched history unfold, not from the books, but from the corridors of power. I saw the fear in a queen's eyes. I heard the trembling in the voice of the King of Kings. And on February 11th, 1979, I was there when the world we knew simply stopped. I watched from a palace window as the very army he built laid down its arms. I saw the gates, the same gates that had kept the world out, buckle under the weight of a new Iran. But to understand how the palace fell, you must understand what broke it from the inside. And it all began with a whisper on a cassette tape. So, let me take you back to those final days, inside Niavaran Palace, when the world outside was burning, and within those walls, the last king of Iran faced the end of his reign. I still remember the scent of orange blossoms drifting through the palace gardens, that sweetness carried through the open corridors of Niavaran, like a promise that nothing could ever go wrong. For over 2 decades, I served inside those walls, polishing silver, arranging flowers, pouring the Shah's tea just the way he liked it. 2 sugars, never 1. To the world, he was the King of Kings. To me, he was a quiet man with tired eyes, who sometimes sat longer than usual at breakfast, lost in thought. Life inside the palace felt insulated from reality. We had our routines, the soft echo of footsteps down marble halls, the distant hum of diplomats' cars arriving, the rustle of crisp uniforms as guards saluted. There were banquets, glittering with foreign dignitaries, orchestras playing under chandeliers heavy enough to crush a man. From where I stood, Iran looked like a land of order and grandeur. But even within those golden gates, I could sense something changing. Late at night, after the ministers left, we servants would clear the ashtrays and catch fragments of their hushed conversations. Words like unrest, inflation, clerics. The Shah's reforms, the so-called White Revolution, had filled the cities with highways, schools, and factories. From the palace windows, we saw them rise, like symbols of progress. Yet, the tone of the visitors grew darker by the week. The palace was a bubble. Magnificent, yes, but sealed tight. Outside, the country was stirring, restless, hungry for something none of us fully understood. And while the fountains still sparkled and the gardens bloomed, a storm was already gathering beyond the gilded walls, waiting for the moment it would break through. The Shah called it the White Revolution, a grand plan to drag Iran into the modern world. From inside the palace, it looked like progress in motion. I remember the excitement in the air whenever a new project was announced, factories opening, highways slicing through the old neighborhoods, new schools and universities rising from dust. The Shah believed he was building a new Iran, one that would rival the West. And in many ways, he was. Land was redistributed, women gained the right to vote, and the economy seemed to boom, with oil money pouring in like liquid gold. but from my corner of the palace, polishing silver trays and serving tea, I began to hear the other side of the story. Ministers whispered after meetings, voices low but heavy. The reforms, they said, had cut deep. The clergy, powerful, respected, and deeply rooted in the country's faith, saw their influence slipping away. They were angry, and they were waiting. And outside those palace gates, life wasn't golden. The oil wealth that was supposed to lift everyone barely touched the poor. Prices rose, wages didn't. I heard drivers and gardeners complain that meat and rice were getting too expensive. The fruit sellers in the bazaar said business was dying. The ordinary Iranian felt left behind, while the rich grew richer, dressed in Western suits and hosting lavish parties. Inside, the Shah spoke of modernization. Outside, the people spoke of betrayal. We servants didn't dare say it aloud, but we could feel the air tightening, the distance between the throne and the people growing wider every day. The White Revolution had lit up the skyline, yes, but it had also cast long, dangerous shadows across the nation. The palace couldn't see it yet, but the anger outside was turning into movement. It began with whispers, then with cassettes, small, unremarkable, plastic tapes that somehow carried a power no one inside the palace could understand. The voice on them was calm, but commanding. Ayatollah Khomeini, the same man the Shah had exiled years earlier. At first, we thought his name had been erased from the country, but his words returned, smuggled in through borders, copied in secret, and played behind closed doors. They called it the cassette revolution. In those days, there was no internet, no satellite TV, just these tapes, passed hand to hand, copied again and again, until nearly every home, every mosque, every shopkeeper seemed to have one. Even in the palace kitchens, one of the younger servants whispered that his brother had heard one being played in the bazaar. The message was always the same: resistance, faith, and the promise of change. By early 1978, the tension had turned into fury. A newspaper article insulted Khomeini, and suddenly, the holy city of Qom was in flames. The protests were fierce, the gunfire even fiercer. People died, no one knew how many. But 40 days later, according to our Shia tradition, the morning brought more protests and more deaths. Another 40 days, another uprising. The cycle refused to stop. At night, we heard it, the haunting echo of Allahu Akbar from the rooftops. It rolled through the dark like thunder, reaching even the palace grounds. I remember standing by a window, frozen, realizing that the voice of one exiled cleric had somehow reached millions. The streets outside were turning into a living storm, and those little cassette tapes had become the drums of revolution, beating louder every night, until even the palace walls began to tremble. I remember the morning the Shah left, January 16th, 1979. The palace corridors, once filled with the sound of hurried footsteps and orders, were silent. We were told His Majesty was going on a vacation, but we all knew what that meant. I helped pack their personal belongings, family photos, a few books, a small framed picture of the Crown Prince. The Empress tried to smile as she gave last instructions to the staff. The Shah looked pale, distant, his illness showing in his trembling hands. Before stepping into the car, He turned and looked back at the palace for a long moment. Then he was gone. One of the older servants, who had served his father, whispered, "It's over." And he was right. The days that followed felt like waiting for an earthquake to hit. The city outside roared with marches and chants. And then, on February 1st, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran. Millions flooded the streets to welcome him home. From our barred windows, we could hear the roar of the crowd, stretching for miles, for 10 days. It was chaos. No one knew who ruled the country anymore. Then came February 11th, the final blow. I was standing near the radio when the announcement came. The military had declared neutrality. The Shah's army, his strongest pillar, would not fight. Outside, the cheering grew deafening. Inside, guards laid down their rifles and walked away. No orders, no resistance, just silence. I walked through the deserted halls. The chandeliers still sparkled, but the heart of the palace was gone. On the Shah's desk sat a half-finished cup of tea, the steam still rising. That was how 2,500 years of monarchy ended, not with gunfire, but with the quiet surrender of a kingdom that no longer existed.